Welcome if you're just joining us. This is the France 24 debate. We're discussing political Islam and the Arab Spring. With us is from the France 24 Arab desk, Mohamed SALEM, Saida, Ounissi, researcher in political sciences at Paris's Sorbonne University, spokesperson for the Union for Islamic Organization in France, Tunisian-born, I should say. With us also as well, Stephen Ekovich, who teaches political science at the American University of Paris, and Ardavan Amir-Aslani, Iranian-born attorney. Thank you for being back with us. I got a question for you, Mohamed, because in part one, Stephen Ekovich making the point that although you've got, on the one hand, the Prime Minister of Tunisia, who's the Secretary General of Ennahda, and then there's the President of the party who's calling the shots. What about in Egypt, where you've got the President who hails from the Muslim Brotherhood, Mohamed Morsi? Is he the one who's in charge? Because there's always these accusations that, well, he's not really the man in charge.
Officially speaking, he is, but everyone in Egypt is saying that the guide of the Muslim Brotherhood, Mohammed Badia, and especially the strong man, economically speaking, Khairat al-Shatir, are those who are really like driving Morsi and telling him what to do. And this is more and more said.
Is there evidence of that, though?
We don't really have evidence, but I think that the people know it because of the structure itself of the Muslim Brotherhood. We've always known that there is this Maktab Irshad, which is like the guidance bureau. And Mohammed Badia is the head of this bureau, and Khairat al-Shatir is his vice. So even people who go on the street for protest, they say Yasqut Hukm al-Murshid, which means down with the guide's rule. And they don't say Yasqut Morsi as often as they say Yasqut al-Murshid. So I think this explains everything. And Morsi is was not even the main candidate of the Muslim Brotherhood. Remember that it was Khairat al-Shatir, and Morsi was called Stibn, and Stibn is like roue de secours, like the substitute.
Tire.
Exactly.
Yeah. Ardavan Amir-Aslani, that sounds a little like your native Iran, doesn't it? Where you have a president who's elected, but you also have the clerics.
No, I don't think that you can compare the situation in Egypt with the situation in Iran. You're comparing, and we saw it through the visit of President Ahmadinejad to Cairo. Egypt is the center of the Sunni Islam world. Al-Azhar Mosque and University are the epitome of what Sunni Islam represents. Iran is totally different. It's a Shia country with a hierarchy system as far as the clergy is concerned. The structure of the Islamic Republic of Iran is such that the supreme leader has its last word on everything, but still you've got an elected parliament, president. You can't compare the situation in Egypt with Iran.
And correct me if I'm wrong, both in the Sunni and the Shia world, there are those who agree and those who disagree with religious people getting involved in politics.
You have this debate ongoing in the entire Arab and Muslim world. This opposition, this dichotomy between those who want to have political Islam prevail as a dominant political force shaping the future of these nations, and those who are much more secular, much more rational, if I dare say, who have a tendency to consider that the path forward is a Western-style democracy. Well, as those who preach political Islam, they also have an agenda. It's not about only electing Muslims to government jobs. It's about people who have a program. And as we saw in Egypt, what President Morsi did was a symbol of this entire story. He managed to incorporate into the constitution of Egypt, and Egypt is the mother of the entire Arab world, as they say, elements of the Sharia faith.
But those
without
were there
consulting. No. They introduced new dimensions with new coverage without even consulting with the Christians or with the secular members who basically left. So you have over here a scenario which is pushing back Egypt to what it was before, even worse.
Saida, Ounissi, your view on where it's going when you look at the constitution that's been framed in Egypt and the one that they're working on in Tunisia.
Yeah, well, I can more speak about Tunisia, obviously, and what was amazing to see, and I think that's also one of the evidence of the maturity sometimes of Islamic parties, and especially in Ennahda, is that they actually gave up on Sharia when they came into power, and when we had all these discussions within the Constitutional Assembly about putting or not the mention of Sharia as the mother of law in the Constitution, and that has been just put in away. And it's also the case when we look at the previous constitutions of Tunisia, and it's good to do a bit of history, because if we talk about the constitution at Bourguiba time, or then with the different reforms at Ben Ali time, there is a lot of references to Islamic law, and the CSP, which was the personal code statute, so modern and so pro-woman made by Bourguiba. But many things, many laws have an Islamic background, and Bourguiba, to make a Zaytouna Shuyukh, for example, accepted that. The fact that we are going to have this CSP in Tunisia, he said it's not completely in opposition to the revolution, to the religion. So don't be afraid of that. So there is definitely.
Let me just ask Mohamed SALEM about this. In Egypt, when I was there a little over a year ago, speaking to Coptic Christians, whenever, they didn't seem to be too bothered about it. They said, "Well, we know that aspect of things." They said, "Well."
They weren't bothered by the second article, which says that the Sharia is the main source of legislation. But, for example, in the new constitution, there is a major difference that was made by the Morsi and the Islamists, is that he removed the interpretation of law from the constitutional court to Al-Azhar, and that's because the Islamists, and I know that from the council of Sheikh Al-Azhar himself, want to control Al-Azhar, and they are doing everything they can to control Al-Azhar, and therefore...
Al-Azhar University, which has great influence throughout the Muslim world.
It's not the university, because you have Al-Azhar University, but you also have Al-Azhar, which is a religious institution. So it's not the university that imports or that's important, but it's the religious institution. And they want to remove the actual Sheikh Al-Azhar and want to put one of them. And afterwards, they will be interpreting the laws and not the courts, and they will be able to do whatever they want to do. And that's a major change in the new constitution that no one really made attention to. So
Stephen Ekovich, 2 years ago, when these uprisings were happening, the reference was Turkey, and the fact that here you had this moderate Islamist party, the AKP, in power. 2 years on, does that reference to Turkey still mean anything?
No. All during the campaign, Anada constantly referred to the Turkish example of a Muslim country with a Muslim-type government that was liberal economically and rather politically tolerant. But after the visit of the Turkish Prime Minister to Tunisia, which was very early on after the revolution, we didn't hear much more about that. We don't hear much more about that in the political discourse of Tunisia. As far as the Tunisian constitution goes, it is true that Bourguiba did get a fatwa from Fadl Ben Ashur, who was the mufti at the Zitouna. The Zitouna is the Muslim university dating from way back in Tunisia. But it's the Bourguiba constitution is a very liberal constitution. People are saying now that one of the problems with this constitution is anytime you try to write something in the Committee of 300, especially a constitution, that's what this Constitutional National Assembly is going to do, you're going to get a kind of magma of incoherent dispositions and articles. And that's largely what we have now with the Tunisian constitution. Some of it is very lyrical, not even written in legalese and constitutional language. At this point, the real constitutional scholars of Tunisia, including the descendants of Ben Ashur, Iyad and Rafa Ben Ashur, the constitution now is being submitted to civil society in Tunisia, and the real constitutional scholars now are giving their opinion on it and giving their evaluation. And I hope that the National Constitutional Assembly of Tunisia will take into consideration the experienced and the knowledgeable considerations and contributions, criticisms of these very high level, and Tunisia has them, very high level constitutional scholars. Yeah.
This is what I witnessed in Tunisia when I was doing my researches, and especially watching the constitutional process. There is a lot of commissions full of, and that made me proud as a Tunisian to see.
But people are growing impatient.
So, yes, but I think it's
too long.
It's too long. But I mean, it's also about writing a constitution which will be there for a long time, and which will also establish a stable country. I think. I
want to get back to the security aspect, which is important. In Egypt this Thursday, security beefed up around several opposition leaders after fatwas by hardline clerics calling for the killing of opposition leaders. The Prime Minister, Hesham Kandil, warning that such edicts could lead to criminal charges against clerics for sedition and disturbance, as he said. Mohamed SALEM, will he follow through? I mean, they've clearly called for the killing of people like Mohamed al-Baradei.
I know, and this discourse, is here in Egypt since few days, and after what happened in Tunisia,
there could be a copycat effect.
I think so. You know, a lot of people in Egypt say that everything that happens in Tunisia happens in Egypt a bit later. So I think we may have this, but let's leave killing main politician figures aside. But young people have been killed and are dying. I know that for us media, it's much more important, and we focus on it much more when it's someone who's well known. But the killing is going on, and when it's young people, it's not as important as when it's someone is like Belaid in Tunisia.
The path towards fear is a long path. They achieved power through the voting process. Now, what we're seeing both in Tunisia and Egypt gradually is a sense of fear, the police and army coming back, people being designated as targets for assassinations. We saw it in Tunisia, we saw it in Egypt. Hotels being emptied, people demonstrating in front of Tunisian hotels, and tourism going down the drain in Egypt and Tunisia. French Caribbean is enjoying a boom because nobody else is going over there.
Let's spell this out. Who is issuing the threats? Is it the party in power?
No.
Or is it these out-of-control elements?
Religious threats can be issued in
or
the
is it
Sunni
by
world
fringe elements
by
who are out of
imams.
control?
No, they could be issued by any guy who calls himself an imam. That's something that is specific to the Sunni world. You don't have a hierarchy. And they have followers. 10 would be enough to conduct an assassination. You don't need Al-Azhar to launch a fatwa. Some guy in a basement with 5 followers could do that. That's not the point. The point is, today, in order to ascertain the Islamic nature of these regimes that came to power through the voting process, now they want to keep control forever by fear. And that's what's happening. We saw it during your show talking about the Tunisian streets, those 2 girls that were questioning why people are trampling that Tunisian party's flag on the ground. They were harassed, run after, wanted to be beaten up. This is how it begins. This is how it begins, and this is how a certain fascist-based attitude comes up. And in particular, from people who believe that they have God on their side. So they don't answer. They don't feel compelled to answer to the people anymore. They have the Quran and God, and that's enough.
And one thing I want to add also, François, is that, in Egypt, for example, the Islamists in power, they have always been blaming the opposition for violence and saying that the opposition is calling for violence. So when you have this kind of discourse...
They haven't targeted the Salafists, is what you're saying.
The Salafists the Islamists in power, the Salafists or the Muslim Brotherhood, they have been saying that the National Salvation Front is the one responsible for violence, whether next to the presidential palace or elsewhere. And when you have this kind of discourse, don't be surprised if you have extremist clerics that you do not control calling for the killing of particular persons like Baradei or Sabahi. So,
what is Egypt's leadership need to do to show that there's rule of law and that you can issue death threats liberally?
Well, I think it's a matter of justice. And if I take the example of the assassination of Belaid, we need to let the justice do its job. I mean, it's quite shocking sometimes to see that, and this is what we heard since yesterday.
But the leader of another party was murdered several months ago. Nobody's been brought to justice over that either.
Well, it's actually for this story that you were talking about, Nida Tunis leader party. I'm coming from Tatawin, so I'm following this because he was from Tatawin. I'm following this story very carefully, and the justice is doing its investigation, and there is people who has been arrested. And I mean, or we say that we want the justice to be independent from the political power, and we let them do their job.
But it's not independent yet. That's the big problem in Tunisia.
I mean, we have to give them. There is a whole process of independentization of the justice in Tunisia, which is going on.
That's one of the main criticisms.
And there is a trial which is going on. There is an investigation. There is people who has been arrested. And now let's wait for the verdict. I mean, it's important also to be less passionate about it.
I want to get back to the point that Ardavan made about how the institution of a climate of fear. Some, though, in Egypt certainly are not taking things lying down. There was a cleric who suggested that violent sexual assaults of women protesters in Tahrir Square in the past week was justified, calling them either crusaders, which means Christians, or widows who have no one to rein them in. Well, thousands marched in Cairo against sexual harassment on Wednesday with some high-profile endorsements.
The goal of this march is to break the state of fear and anxiety that the Muslim Brotherhood are always trying to create. And it proves that they are scared of us, especially of women. The women of Egypt are very strong.
Saida Ounissi, she's not blaming Salafists or extremists. She's blaming the Muslim Brotherhood.
About sexual harassment, I think that if we go back to the facts, sexual harassment has been present in Egypt since a long time. And this is a social problem. It's not about having a political party into the power.
But
It's a whole, it's a
You
whole...
have gangs that go to Tahrir Square, and those
Obviously,
who
and
are,
these
those who are
gangs have
fighting
to be
against sexual harassment
have
will
to
tell
be
you that
trialed and
they
they have to be judged. I mean, it's about violence. It's not. I don't see it as a link, like with a link to any political party being on power or not. It's about educating men on the streets.
you
It's
have a
about
government
education.
that
It's about
doesn't say
respecting women.
anything against
It's
it.
about
Shouldn't
women
the government be
women
speaking
rights.
out more? Shouldn't we hear from President Morsi?
Obviously, we do.
look
Obviously,
at the
but not only President Morsi, but in all the Arab countries, it's very important that the political power states that. But
Foreign
it's
policy.
facts which already exist, and it's more a state issue than linked to a political party.
What I'm hearing is that has existed for a very long time in many countries and many cultures. But what I'm hearing here is that there are organized bands that are using it for political purposes. That's something else.
Foreign Policy magazine a couple of months ago titled its cover, Fear of Women in Political Islam. And effectively,
If we see
political
Nahda
Islam
elected people, there is more women.
is afraid
let's
of
also
females.
look to the facts.
Now, going back to justice, and this is being mentioned. What justice?
Very
2 years
briefly, 'cause
after
we're-
Egypt's revolution, you don't have a single member of the previous regime that has been charged with anything. Even Mubarak hasn't been charged. The only people they managed to
convicted.
charge, it was overturned by the appellate court. He hasn't been charged today. The only folks that have been charged are the supporters of the Port Said team that coincidentally were fighting for independence for that area. So justice doesn't work, and that's why people are not happy.
All right,
There
and
is no
It's
justice.
certainly something that we're going to continue to follow. I want to thank you, Ardavan,
Thank you.
Amir-Aslani, Saida Ounissi, Mohamed SALEM, Stephen Ekovich. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.